Hello and welcome to Behind the Grind. I'm Matt Donnelly, and this is the only show where the guest needs less of an intro than the host does, because you will know our guest right away, even though he's got a little bit more flow than normal. He is one of the greatest guys there in the industry right now. He's more than just a football guy. He is the senior editor over at Athlon Sports Fantasy Draft Guide. Among the many hats that he has worn, he is the University of South Florida's claim to fame. He is the one and only Luke Easterling. How are you doing, Luke?
I'm doing great, Matt. Thanks for having me, man.
I'm excited to get this done. I was just kind of talking to you a little bit off air before we jumped on. And one of the things that I've always appreciated is having an opportunity to write in a magazine. I think it hits a little bit different, having it published and having it on the news shelves. And we've all done articles on the web. And it's just a little bit different when you have that copy in your hand. So I just recently did some stuff for the Pro Forecast for the 35th annual edition of that. And I'm at my local stores here. I'm looking at magazines. And I pulled up the Athlon Draft Guide. I opened it up and there's, boom, senior draft editor Luke Easterling. And I'm like, I haven't had him on Behind the Grind. We got to get this guy on. And then, of course, we're looking for thumbnails. And the thumbnail I got, you look like you're about 16 years old. And now you look like a grizzled old fantasy veteran here nowadays.
Yeah. I think that picture is from my friend's wedding when I was like 23 or 24. Now I recently moved to Washington, so I think it's like maybe just the mountain. I'm going full mountain man at this point in my life. That was a long time ago. That picture for sure.
That suits you. That look suits you. I mean, I wish I could grow the flow once again. I mean, some of us are we're not genetically gifted to do that. So we have to grow it in other areas. So with that all being said, you mentioned your move to Washington here. You've kind of been here, been there, done that, done this. But before we get into that part of the show, we got into my favorite question here. What would your intro music be if you were coming in to close out the ninth inning here, or if you're coming down in a WWE ring? What would that music be to introduce you to the people?
Oh my gosh, what a fantastic question. I'm a child of the golden age of like pop punk from like the early to mid 2000s. So I'd have to go somewhere like Yellow Card or Anberlin or one of those bands that is like iconic from that genre. Give me the intro to Anberlin's Feel Good Drag, maybe. If you look up that song, that's a phenomenal intro. I'd love batters to hear that when I come rolling down.
Well, we encourage singing, so feel free to kind of rip us off a few chords.
Not happening. I'm a drummer. The drum kit is in the other room. I'll send you a drum cover of it at some point. I'm not gonna kill your listeners with my singing.
Perfect. Are you one of those guys like we used to have, like where I work? We had a drummer that kind of worked with us, and every day at the lunch table he'd sit there all the time.
Unstoppable. I can't help it. It just happens at all times.
I love it. Now you kind of mentioned that whole kind of genre of music, but is there a guilty pleasure song that you're like kind of don't want to admit to, but you're like, you know what? Well, let's let the people know. Like, is there? I know for me, having kids, I've gone through the whole Miley Cyrus, Hilary Duff, Selena Gomez thing, and then, I'm not afraid to admit it. There's some catchy beats in there along the way that I've picked up. I couldn't tell you what they are, but I'm not afraid to admit it.
Oh yeah, I mean, not to wax too poetic here, but like I'm not a proper musician or anything, but like that's my favorite thing about music is that there's something for everybody, and you don't have to like everything, but you don't have to hate on it either. And so, if you just like a piece of music, I feel like people should never be like, oh, I'm not allowed to like that because it is whatever. Like, I love like Disney soundtracks. I love like one of my favorite movies is Pride and Prejudice. So like I'll just throw that soundtrack on because the music is beautiful. It's got pianos and strings and stuff. While I'm washing dishes, I got this big orchestral music. So I'm just as likely to put on something like that as I am, like I said, my pop punk and stuff. Some of the older like country stuff I don't get into as much. But man, hip hop, R&B, screamo, metal, I mean, whatever it is, man. If I like it, I'm gonna go ahead and tell you. I like Kesha. Like there's whatever it is, man. If I enjoy it, I'm not going to allow myself to pretend I don't.
Hey, you mentioned moving to Washington, kind of get that mountain man look. I'm from the mountains here in Alberta, Canada. I've got my hillbilly rock. That is my guilty pleasure. I love a good old hillbilly rock kind of slapper going on there. So I get it. And we've all been guilty of let it go, let it go.
It's incredible.
We've all done that. We've all belted out Disney songs at one point in our lives.
Got to do it, man. Let yourself have fun. That's what art's all about.
All right. Now, one thing I've kind of picked up is sports has always been part of your life. It's always been part of your career since high school and probably even before that. So kind of let us know how you got into sports.
I mean, how I got into sports, I think I'm one of many siblings. So we had a big family. My older brother, I'm the second kid. So my older brother started playing Little League baseball when he was like 9 or 10. He's about 4.5, 5 years older than me. So watching him enjoy that right away, I was like, oh, I want to do that. I want to be into that. So it's funny because like my dad was really good at basketball when he was younger, but you know, when he became a dad, he was super like, hey, whatever you guys want to do. So my older brother gravitated to baseball. And like, I know I'm biased, but my older brother was a damn good baseball player. Like he was really good. And so watching him play, I was like, I want to do that. So when I was like 4 or 5, I got into baseball. I played Little League baseball until I was probably 12 or 13, until the parents started to get really annoying. Legitimately, man. I remember being 9 years old and my team was undefeated at the time and we finally lost a game. And I remember being like, oh, that sucks. You're 9. What the hell? Like, you're 9. But I'll never forget, I looked across the diamond and where the parents were standing like in the stands for the other team, a parent of that team had climbed halfway up the fence and was like screaming at us children, taunting us because we lost a baseball game. And that was like the beginning of the end for me. I was like, what is wrong with these people? And then like the next few years I started to get, it just became too much. I was like, I'm really trying to have fun here, but like the coaches are too, everything is getting so specialized and competitive. I mean, this is in the mid to late 90s as all of that specialization in youth sports started to happen. And a lot of us kids were just trying to have a good time and the adults were making it hard on us to do that. But I think after I stopped playing baseball, I tried basketball just because that was my dad's sport and I had fun with that, but it definitely wasn't much of a, it didn't click. I was like, yeah, that's fun. But when I became a freshman in high school, I really wanted to try to play football. And I mean, I was small. I was not a big kid at all. And so my parents were like, I don't know, tackle football. That seems a bit much. But I'm glad they let me try it out. I played at a small school, small Christian school, and worked my way up a little bit here and there, transferred one school to the other. But once I found football, I think I really fell in love with the game. I really enjoyed the mental part of baseball, but football, there was just a different level of fun that I had playing that game. And so I had a blast playing in high school. I didn't play at a very high, big school or anything, but I had so much fun playing the game in high school. I played a little bit in college, but I think just falling in love with the game there and realizing as I grew up that playing it was fun, but I probably wasn't going to, the more I understood about scouting, the more I understood that a 5'11", 185-pound quarterback who can't run, sub 4.5 probably isn't going to go very far. And so that started to blend with the only other thing I've loved for my entire life, I think, which is writing. And so, there's definitely a moment, when I was trying to do both. I literally wrote a piece about a school that was starting a football program, and then I scored 4 touchdowns against that team like 3 months later after writing an article about them in the newspaper. So that was fun. But it's something I've always tried to balance. And once I stopped playing, I always knew I wanted to write about it for as long as I could. So that's better on it's better on my health to be writing about it instead of playing it. Man, I had a blast playing the game. I'm glad I played it kind of enough to give me an appreciation for the effort and the talent it takes to get. That's one thing I always tell people. Like I played long enough to realize the amount of work that I'm going to have to put in to account for the gap in talent that I have is just not a sacrifice I was willing to make at some point in my life. And I'm perfectly fine with that. I have no qualms about getting to that point and be like, it's time for me to write about this and not play it. But it gives me such an appreciation for the people who do play this game at the highest level and what it takes to get there. I know what it looks like to not even get close to that, and to know what it takes to be the best at that. I have such an appreciation for that.
I love how you mentioned, I'm probably putting words in your mouth. The parents do find a way to ruin good things for kids from time to time, especially when it comes to sports, whether that's them trying to live through their children, their whatever heyday they may have had once upon a time. As someone who's coached youth sports a long ways growing up and all my kids and stuff, I get it 100%. Like I've seen some of these things at the U15 hockey level, even at the house league level, where these kids are definitely not going on. This is where house league is where it's meant to be fun. It's not the travel leagues, but you see these parents get personal with a lot of it. And with these kids, I mean, they're kids for crying out loud. So I get this 100%. And that's where I think a lot of kids are kind of losing that desire, that love for the game. And people need to remember, it's just a game. When it's all said and done, it's a game that people enjoy playing for the most part. And it's really quick to lose that love, especially with everything being so specialized nowadays. A lot of people that I've talked to, pro hockey players, they played lacrosse, they played baseball, they did these other things to kind of get ready during the off season. Meanwhile, now you have to specialize in that sport. Now,
you have to have a private quarterback coach at 8 years old now, and it's just like, come on, guys.
It is. And then, you know what? Sadly, like for me, I know what it's like with my kid being a goalie. You feel like you almost have to keep up with the Joneses from time to time, or else you're going to fall behind. And you feel like you're doing your child a disservice. Now, through those lessons from your youth there and through sports, how did those lessons kind of develop you as a youth? Was there maybe one coach that said something to you as a kid that kind of resonated throughout your career?
I don't know if it was one coach. I think, and I mentioned my parents were such a big influence, because while there were a bunch of parents around that were kind of behaving that way as I grew up, my parents did such a great job of keeping me grounded and like, hey, you are just supposed to be having fun, and they kind of roll their eyes at those parents too and be like, I'm sorry, it shouldn't be like that. And so they did a great job of allowing us to pursue what we wanted to do, doing the best they could. We didn't have a ton of resources growing up, but they always did their best. They worked really hard to make sure we had as many opportunities as possible and had a chance to do what we wanted to do in order to have fun, but to develop those skills if we wanted to. And man, I did have some great coaches, even through Little League, even some of the harder ones that kind of pushed me. I still appreciate the things that I gleaned from each of those coaches. And I think maybe there was an opportunity. I think one of the most important things that happened to me when I started playing football, I started out at one school and I played the first 2 years there. I ended up starting as the quarterback at my sophomore year, which was a very deer in the headlights experience for me, coming from it. I didn't play football at all till high school. And so that year I learned a lot, but then I had to play at a different school for the next 2 years. And when I went to that other school, everything starts over. They already had a quarterback. I had to learn some different things. So they put me at defensive end my junior year when I moved to that new school. I was a backup quarterback, but they put me on defense, trying to find a place for me to be on the field. And I was like, I'm 160 pounds soaking wet. What am I doing on the defensive front? And there was, those first couple of weeks of camp, I was really, really frustrated about it. I was starting to get in my feelings about it and be like, hey, I'm supposed to be throwing the football here. And I think, just a combination of my parents and my coaches kind of getting me to understand, like, hey, you have no control over that. You have control over your situation. So I think that opportunity my junior year, where I kind of flipped the switch and was like, hey, just focus on being the best defensive end you could possibly be at 165 pounds and use your speed to your advantage. Try to use the things that maybe the other, I think that change in focus for me mentally of trying to not dwell on what I couldn't control and just focus on being the best where I could be. I think that was huge. The following year, I got to be the starting quarterback as a senior. We had a huge season. We had a great year. I had so many great memories of that year. And I think that doesn't happen if I wasn't able to kind of learn some humility and learn how to be a team player the year before. I think that was a really formative experience for me as an athlete and as a person.
I think it's safe to say that one of your favorite teams growing up was probably the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, from what I've kind of looked back on there. So I got to ask you this: what was a bigger moment for you? The Bucs winning that Super Bowl, or you in that senior year of high school winning Player of the Week? And I believe there was one Rondé Barber that came as a guest speaker, and you got to meet him one-on-one. So what was bigger for you, the Super Bowl or the one-on-one interaction?
It's so funny, man. I could probably do an entire episode about that whole experience. I grew up. Rondé was my favorite player for such a long time, and then my senior year, I won this award as like a Player of the Week, and then they had a banquet at the end of the year to honor all the kids who had won that year. And when I found out he was going to be like the keynote speaker, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So I took like a shirt and like a card, just like hoping for like 10 seconds so he would autograph them. And no lie, man, I just went up and asked him, and he started asking me questions. He was like, hey, what kind of stuff are you, into? And we ended up getting on the topic of the fact that I wanted to be a sports journalist, that I wanted to be a sports writer. And so he talked my ear off for probably about a half hour that night, in addition to signing all the stuff I brought and being a nice guy. But it ended with him saying, hey, call the office, call the Bucs next week, and talk to so-and-so and set it up. And I'll give you an exclusive interview for your tiny little blog that no one reads, right? Like I just had my own little blog. This is in 2003. So that, I mean, think about where the internet is at this point. And so sure enough, Rondé Barber called my house on a Tuesday and talked. He answered all my questions. He was doing some literacy program for Verizon back in the day. I remember asking him about that. And I mean, this is at the height of his career. He was an all-pro. He had just picked off 10 passes in a season, and he took the time out of not just his evening to spend with me, but then again, followed through on that and really helped me launch that career and really kind of cement that that's what I wanted to do with my life. So he's become a great friend over the years. We've stayed in touch. And he knows how grateful I am to him for kind of helping me get my start at the height of his career. That was such a kind gesture from him. So for me, I have to say it was that, just because that had such a big impact on my life. That Super Bowl happened when I was, I think, 16. So obviously that was such a huge moment as a fan. But my senior year too, I made the All-Star team that year. So I got to play at Raymond James Stadium at the end of the year in the All-Star game. So I've played on that field, which is really fun. But man, when I think about the Bucs, man, I think about my entire family, all the memories we have growing up, because they sucked for so long, man. I was born in '85. They didn't go to the playoffs, I don't think, until '97. So like that entire, like growing up and growing up as a Bucs fan in Tampa, and all your other friends around you are switching from the Cowboys to the Steelers to the Packers to the Broncos to the Patriots every couple of years, depending on who's good. And you're still walking around with your creamsicle starter jacket, just hoping for good days. For that to finally pay off with that incredible run through the 2000s and that dominant defense. And obviously shout out to Monty Kiffin, who unfortunately passed last night. But man, what a legendary coach he was throughout those teams. But that's what it's about for me. It's all those years when we couldn't even watch the Bucs on TV, Matt. They were blacked out in home games. So like Gene Deckerhoff, the legendary radio announcer, that's all we got. We got Bucs on the radio for most of my childhood. We couldn't even watch them on TV. So that's what I think about when I think about my Bucs fandom. I think of, listening to it on the radio with my family and experiencing that growing from like, yeah, we're bad to actually getting to the top of the mountain. What a fun experience that's been as a fan.
I can only imagine that first interview, that nervous energy that probably first, like I've done some interviews with Sirius XM radio on the phone. And if you can't see that person across from you, it's an uneasy feeling for the most part. Like you don't know how they're reacting. And now you throw in one of these players that you have the utmost respect for.
Yeah, man.
You don't want to screw that up. You know what I mean? You're like, so I can just imagine what kind of went through your head during that and the nervous energy. But it sounds like you nailed it because, hey, look where we are now. Like that little blog, that one interview arguably launched you to where you are today. So
yeah, I mean, that's how I feel. I still have it on one of those miniature cassette tapes. I don't know if you remember these, that you would have to put inside another one and then inside the tape player. I still have that tiny little cassette tape with that interview on it. It's pretty wild.
Well, your joy was my pain as a Raiders fan. So, hey,
sorry. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. I really wanted that one for Tim Brown. Like, hey, you mentioned sometimes we weren't good since the 80s. We got good there for a couple of years, and then we got Grudened, I guess is the best way to put it at that one point.
You did. Oh man, I love Tim Brown. Tim Brown spent his last year in Tampa actually, and that was right as I got my first job at a newspaper, and I got to do some Bucs games as a part of that. I got to meet Tim Brown. That was one of the players in the locker room. I made sure I sought out. I was like, oh my God, Tim Brown's here. This is awesome. What a legend.
There's like a checklist you have as a journalist that guys you want to talk to. And for me, Tim Brown, he's right at the top of the list because for me, he was Mr. Raider, even though he went on to kind of spent the last couple of years in Tampa Bay. At least it wasn't like Jerry Rice going to Seattle or Denver kind of ruining that whole thing for me.
Right.
Now, your Athlon kind of bio there talks about Tampa, Florida being the home of the Cuban sandwich. Now,
I literally have a shirt on right now that has a Cuban sandwich on.
I love when things all tie in together really nicely. Like
we didn't even plan it. It was not planned. This was perfect.
So, and I know you do a lot of draft prospect scouting. So give me the scouting report on the Cuban sandwich out of Tampa.
All right. So this is why this gets into a big deal, because people from Miami get really, really mad about this, right? They think that the Cuban sandwiches originated there. But the idea of the Cuban sandwich happened when the cigar factory started popping up in Tampa when there was a railroad that they put in, that Henry Plant put in, and the University of Tampa. I don't know if you've ever been there, but seen that building. It's one of the coolest, most ornate buildings ever. But it opened as a hotel in the early 1900s, and ended up becoming the university. But Henry Plant had all these things going on. That's when commerce really started in the Tampa Bay area. But the cigar factories were a huge part of the early economy as Tampa was growing, and you had all of these immigrants from these different cultures coming in. You had Cuban immigrants and you had Italian immigrants, which again, I have a bunch of Italian heritage in my family. And so you had German heritage, and all these different people ended up working at these factories, and they kind of combined to create this sandwich that ended up being called the Cubano. But that's what it's got, all these different layers. It's got roast pork. You've got to have the salami, which a lot of people say, oh, no salami on a Cuban sandwich. That's what makes it a Cuban sandwich. You've got to have the Italian portion of that, because that's kind of how it originated. But you got to have your pickles. You got to have tomatoes. Not necessary. I like tomato on mine. You have mustard. Some people blend it with mayonnaise and have like a kind of a more Dijon feel to it. But it's got to be on actual French bread. I'm up here in the Western Washington area now, and there's only like one place that does like a legitimate Cuban sandwich, and they have a Cuban sandwich, and they have a Tampa Cuban sandwich that also has salami on it. So I was happy to see that. But you got to have it on Cuban bread, man. There's a place around here that says, hey, we have a Cuban sandwich and it's on a French roll. That's not a Cuban sandwich if it's on a French roll. You can't do it. So they're definitely key elements that you have to have for the Cuban sandwich. And anybody who wants to debate me on the origins of it and the fact that Tampa owns that, bring it on. I will do it all day long.
I did not think these questions through, because back here, I mean, you're out in Washington. I'm here in Alberta. It's just after 12 here in Alberta time. And now I'm hungry. Now I want a sandwich.
Yeah, I was going to say I haven't had lunch either. I might have to go find one of those now.
Now, going back to your career here, we kind of talked about the Rondé Barber interview. Can you tell me maybe about a decision that you personally had, whether you made it or someone else made it for you, that kind of changed the trajectory of your life?
You know, I think there were probably a couple, and there are specific people that I think were involved. You know, when I tried to get into journalism very early. You know, I was probably 16 years old when I started working at the local newspaper doing high school games, right? I mean, I was in high school, but I would tag along with a sports writer and cover a softball game and just learn, just learn the craft. And the copy editors at the Tampa Tribune at the time knew that I really wanted to get into draft work, right? So when the draft weekend would come around, even when I was high school, they would just bring me in, pay me $50, and I would just sit there and type names in, just to be there in the newsroom and kind of understand how the world worked. And then when I was 18, I actually put off college for a semester because I had a family friend growing up that worked at that newspaper and knew I wanted to get in there. So he kind of got me a job just working at the front desk of the whole newsroom, answering phones. And I spent 4 months in that job, and I got to know all the different reporters in all the different, areas of the newspaper. I got to continue working in sports a little bit here and there. But Bob Ballone was his name. He was the administrative assistant in the sports department of the Tribune back in the day. And so without Bob giving me that first jump into that, and he was such a great friend, man. He used to go all over the country doing like freelance work for AP and stuff. And one time he was like, hey, I'm taking this trip. You're going to hate me for it. I'm going to drive up to Starkville, Mississippi and see Mississippi State play Auburn. This is in 2003 when Auburn went undefeated. And then I'm going to drive straight from there to Tuscaloosa and see Ole Miss play Alabama that night. So 2 SEC games in the same day in 2 different states. And I was like, yeah, I hate you. And he's like, hey, you want to come? So we did. We jumped in a Pontiac Sunfire and we drove and made that trip. Got to see Cadillac Williams and Ronnie Brown rush for like $150 each against Mississippi State. And we got to go to Bryant Denny for a night game against Ole Miss. So I credit Bob with kind of getting me my start in the print side of the industry, which, to go back to what you said earlier about still seeing my name in print, that matters a great deal to me. My grandfather was a printing press guy at that same newspaper for 40 years, when long before I was even born. My dad worked there slinging papers for a while. And so the print product still means so much to me. To see it when we got to do the draft guide, when we get to do all these print guides, and to see them survive as physical media is really, really important to me. And so, I mean, that was a big deal to me. And I think the year that I spent playing college football, I played at a small NAIA school in Kentucky. And I just couldn't stay healthy. I could tell that it was time for me to stop trying to play. And I think the decision to kind of understand, to be self-aware and self-honest and say, hey, it's time to let this dream go. And I actually got a job at the local newspaper up there. So I started the year as like a backup quarterback. And by the end of the year, I was writing feature stories on my teammates for the newspaper, because I realized like, hey, I was having more fun coaching the other guys up and seeing the younger guys play well than I was kind of concerned with my production. And so I think that just kind of realized that hey, it was time to move on. It was time to make that decision and focus on that part. There's so many different people, man. I've had a cup of coffee at pretty much every digital outlet in this business. I've written for Fansided and Bleacher Report and Draft Breakdown and Scout. I spent 7 years with USA Today at DraftWire and BucksWire. And so many people along those stops, the editors that I had at Bleacher Report, Justin Onslow and Ian Kenyon, my editors and people at USA Today, Neil Coulong and Chris Perrone, and so many people there. Every step of the way, Brian Perez, who ran First Round Grade back in the day, he runs Bears Talk now, probably my best friend in this business. I mean, there's so many people that along the way, that whole era of draft Twitter where it first started to become a thing, there's still so many guys from that group that have gone on to do great things. And so, I don't know, man, I feel like I've been lucky at every step of the way to, I know I'm good enough at what I do, but it's not about talent. It's so much about the people around you and giving opportunities to me throughout my career. It still continues to happen. I'm indebted to those people that continue to say my name in rooms I'm not in, to allow me to keep doing this. And I'll always be grateful to all those people.
I think that's the ultimate courtesy, the ultimate compliment, is having people speak highly of you when you're not around, right? I mean, it goes a long way. I love the whole Kentucky story there, because that's like the ultimate beat writer right there. The backup quarterback, it's got all the exclusive information. We all heard that joke. The backup quarterback is everybody's favorite, right? The fans, the players. So you get all that inside. And then you mentioned the print. I'm like, I've got all the magazines still that I've ever had an opportunity to writing. And they sit right here. I proudly display them. So that's what it is. Now, you talk about the draft, and we've had people who've got lots of draft experience come on the show before. One of the biggest things they said from when they started to where we are now is the growth of the draft in itself. So for you, when you look at some of the biggest changes now versus when you first started, what are you seeing out there? What's the biggest change for you?
Honestly, I think, and some people will call this a negative, but I really think it's an eye of the beholder type thing. And I think the beauty of the advancements in technology that we have is that everybody has an opportunity to put their work out there. And I just think that is a net positive. Obviously if you give everybody a chance to speak, everybody has a chance to speak, and not everybody's going to have, great things to say. But I really do think in this industry, in the draft industry, and I have to say that in a certain way, because that's the only way I got here. If before anybody else would hire me, I just made my own blog again. I made a new one, and it was called The Draft Report, and I just wrote what I wanted to write. Matt Miller from ESPN, who's a great friend of mine, is another one of those people who, when I just had my own tiny little blog that nobody read, and he had started to build a following on Twitter, and he and I became friends, and he was one of those people who had a massive following, who was like, hey, check this person's work out. I know you may not have heard of it. I know it's not on a big outlet or whatever, but he's doing good work over here. And that's what led, because he was at Bleacher Report at the time. And so that connection happened. And so Matt's another one of those people that I'm indebted to for that. But I think the biggest thing that I love about where our industry has come, and again, a lot of this credit goes obviously to Mel Kiper and Joel Bushbaum and so many of those legends of the origins of draft prognostication, that, if you have the ability to make a website, you can tell your story. If you have the ability to get a social media account, you can put your work out there. You can say, hey, I'm breaking this film. You can create your own niche and do the work you want to be doing. And at some point, somebody comes along who has the ability to pay you to do that, or have, find you a spot on their team or whatever. It's just so fun. Again, I mentioned so many of those guys that I knew when draft Twitter was a thing. And so many of those guys work for all these massive outlets now, and they have this big reach now. But I remember when we were all just sitting on these Google Hangouts, just chatting up about prospects and dreaming of the days when we could do this for a living. And the fact that some of us are able to do that now is just so cool. So I don't know. Again, there's negatives to social media. There's negatives to the ability to quickly get information out from anywhere at any one. But I think in our business, man, I just love one of my favorite things is coming across somebody new that I've never heard of, that I've never read before, and seeing a really well thought out piece, a really cool piece that I haven't seen anywhere, and all this unique work, because people feel like they have the ability to share it. They're like, if I just put it out there, someone will appreciate it, someone will enjoy it. And I just think that's great for our industry, man, that so many people feel empowered to be able to put their work out there and know that someone's going to find it entertaining and find it useful. I love that.
Well, it's interesting because when you evaluate prospects, especially this draft, it's nice to have more eyes on the prospect, more different points of view, because I know with my process, when I evaluate someone, I see certain things. And then if someone else sees something else, I have to go back into my process. What did I miss? How did I miss this? And it kind of opens my eyes. And I love how you mentioned the whole anyone can get on here, get doing it, and this and that. Like, who's got two thumbs and shouldn't have a platform? This guy right here. Like, this is a good example, right? This is my passion project. This is like a therapeutic thing for me. And you mentioned Matt Miller. We had him on this show here a couple weeks back. And you mentioned people that, like, I didn't know Matt Miller personally, so I didn't know what to expect. Got him on the show. One of the nicest guys you will ever meet, right? I wasn't expecting that nice of a person on the show, right? So you go in with these kind of like, what am I getting into? Totally nice guy. So, man, those Google Hangouts, I'm a little kind of jealous of those early days back in the day there. Now, one thing during my research on you here, you mentioned your big family, brothers, sister there. You've had the opportunity to be on Raymond James Field there. You've been around NFL players. However, my understanding is your sister is the only one ever to make the NFL. So how does that make your family feel right now?
Oh man, we're so proud. It's such a fun stat for sure. But yeah, we have I'm one of four brothers, and so I'm the second of four brothers, and then the youngest of us is my sister. And so yeah, we always joke all the time that we all played sports growing up, but my sister is the only one of us to actually be a Buccaneer, because she was on the cheerleading team for 3 years. And it was fun. In 2019, I was actually an on-site everyday beat writer. I was working for SI at the time. And it was fun to go to work every Sunday with my sister and see her. When I signed into the logbook down in the media center, there were two Easterlings there, and my sister's name was always right next to mine. So what a cool thing. Yeah, for sure. We're super proud of her. It was great. She was an incredible dancer for years and years and years. And again, got to cheer for her team for a few seasons. And have a lot of fun. So always a fun stat there to poke fun at us boys who never made it to the NFL, but she sure did.
She can poke fun of a lot of guys out there, like myself included there, but who never had that opportunity. So yeah, kudos. I thought it was kind of funny when I seen that. I was like, I got to ask this question. I got to throw it out there. But now I'm going to throw this one out there. As a journalist yourself, you've written quite a bit of content, maybe not a book yet or anything, but if you did write a book about yourself, a self-documentary, if you will, what would that title of that book be?
What would the title of the book here? It would probably be called "I'm Still Trying to Figure This Out." Okay, that's really the way I kind of look at everything. Is I think there's an idea that a lot of people understand, which is that to never really feel like you've truly arrived, to kind of keep pushing and keep trying to improve and things like that. And to me, I think looking at it, trying to look at everything without a destination necessarily in mind, and trying to just enjoy the journey, but also not fall victim to the pitfalls of thinking that you've always got everything figured out at any point. And you know, there's, again, I've had a lot of experiences. I've written for a lot of outlets. I've learned a lot of things. I mean, I'm 38 years old, man, and I feel like that if I look back at that person whose photo you see when you bring up my little headshot, I think that guy thought he had way more figured out than this guy is well aware that he doesn't. And so I think that's why I would call it that, man. Because even, you know, I feel like as I get older, all I do is realize how much I really don't know, and being comfortable with that, and being comfortable with figuring out the best I can as I go. I feel like that would make sense.
If I knew then what I know now, I mean, that's kind of those things you're like, yeah, absolutely. May I have a suggestion here for the book?
Bring it on.
How about no bucking clue. A little time.
Yeah, I'll take that. Creamsicle cover with some piratey elements. I like it.
We can work with this. Now, I know, unlike most people, like, this is sports journalism is where you wanted to go all the way back into high school, 16 years old, whatever it was, in the printing press already. But at what point did you really decide that this is where you're going, that this was going to work for you? Because a lot of times I know people go into this thinking it's going to work and it doesn't. There's a lot of hardship, a lot of, self-judgment, a lot of questioning where you're going to be. So at what point did you be like, you know what, this is going to work for me?
Yeah, I think again, it's two moments, right? Earlier in my life when I was like, hey, I think I have an opportunity to do this. It's really what I want to push for. It's one thing to do that, right? It's another thing entirely when you try to do that in your young adult life and you come up against those blockades and that adversity that kind of tries to keep you out. How do you respond to that, right? Because two things happened when I got a little older. I thought it was going to be a seamless transition, right? I get this job right out of high school. I work at the newspaper. I go to school. I get my mass communications degree in journalism. I do my 4 years. I get an automatic job in a newspaper. I become a beat writer. And 40 years later, I retire to fanfare. That's how this is supposed to work, right? That's kind of the idea that I had in my head. And what's funny is I was working at a newspaper at the beginning of the death of modern newspapers, right? And so I was working at a newspaper in the evening in the sports department, but I was going to school in the morning, learning journalism, and then I was going to work at night and understanding that what I was being taught was becoming obsolete in real time. And so it was a struggle for me mentally to be like, this is really important to me on a macro level, like beyond sports, like journalism and the impact it has on your local community and the greater world is a really important thing to me. But to see technology starting to kind of impact that, to see the way venture capitalism was starting to impact newspapers as entities and just assets to kind of be sold off, it was a struggle for me to realize, man, I could spend the next 4 years working at this degree and then come out of it and have a barren wasteland of actual journalism to work in. And so it was a struggle for me to realize, hey, where do I put my focus? Is it going to be in trying to only learn these traditional measures, knowing that they're kind of starting to die off in certain ways? And I realized very quickly that I had to stay mentally on the cutting edge of where this was going, right? I had to learn the digital side. I had to become more proficient in the internet and how these things were working. Again, I was, in my teens and 20s as this was happening. So I tried to get out in front of it and realize I'm going to have to learn all this stuff because I really think this is where it's going. And obviously that ended up happening, but you still have to pay the bills. And so what happened for me was I couldn't find a full-time job in journalism. I ended up, there's an actual moment, an exact time to answer your question specifically. There is actually a time when I had that blog that I was writing, the draft report. And I remember I wrote like a really in-depth film piece on Le'Veon Bell and Manti Te'o as prospects because they played against each other, Michigan State and Notre Dame. And I wrote this big long thing. And I remember staring at the screen where it shows my WordPress stats. And it said 6 page views in like 3 days. And I'll never forget that number. I can see it plain as day right now, just staring at that screen going like, what are you doing with your life? Like you're putting all this time and effort. And obviously I had a full-time job at the time. I had a very young child at the time and very overwhelmed with life and just being like, hey, I'm working for $9 an hour at the local science museum and then trying to build this career on the side, and nobody cares. Nobody's reading all this stuff that I'm putting my effort into. And so that moment I had to have a conversation with myself right then about, you're either going to stop wasting your time on this, or you're going to have to understand that if you're going to continue, you have to love it enough. You have to just do it because you enjoy the process of watching tape and evaluating players and staying involved in that process just because it's fun, just like you were when you were a kid and nobody was paying you to do it then. You have to be able to do it. You have to love it enough to do it, whether or not anybody reads it or pays you for it or not. And so I made that decision in that moment. You know what? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I have to remove myself from needing that and just do it because I love it. And I think once I made that decision, I don't think it's any coincidence that it didn't take long after that before I started to get an opportunity here, an opportunity there, and it kind of snowballed into where I am now. So that I absolutely have an exact moment where I made that call.
Well, and that seemed like a kind of a gutsy call because you mentioned the death of the printing press along the way, or you could see it kind of coming and digital was coming in and stuff like that. But I look at this, I look at young Luke here, 16 years old, making this decision that this is what I'm going to do. This is what I want to do. What if this doesn't happen? What is Luke doing? Like, could you see yourself being like a firefighter or a Cuban sandwich maker? Like, where would you have gone if the writing never panned out?
You know what's funny is if it hadn't worked out, and again, I look back and I remember my dad being known to me, like I didn't really care what he did. Like I didn't really even know or understand. He drew like computer maps for the phone company for a long time. And so like he was always just dad, and always just, I knew he busted his ass, and I knew he would get home and be a great dad and be doing all the yard work, and was always so present in all of our activities that he was doing. And so for me, I think it was this, or there's really nothing else that I would have felt like, oh, that's really what I need to be doing. It would have been more like, hey, I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure my family's taken care of. I'm going to be the best damn dad I can, which again, I still try to be, even though I get to live out the dream and do what I really want to do. But, for me, it would have been more about whatever job allows me to do this. And to that end, I had a full-time job. Most of the time I was still doing this basically full-time also. I started as just like a part-time coach at a local after-school program back in Tampa. And eventually the president of the company came to me and he's like, hey, I'm going to try to grow this and I need somebody full-time to kind of help me. Do you think you could do that? And I was like, sure. So we ended up building this kind of sports enrichment tutoring program for kids, where we would go into schools and take over the after school program for the teachers, which the teachers were always like, thank God, thank you for doing that, so I can actually just focus on my teaching. But we built it into like 6 different locations, and we really grew that program. But the best part about it, my boss's his name is Jason. He was so supportive of the fact that he knew this is really what I wanted to do. And so even though I was, very busy with his stuff and helping him grow this company, anytime anything came up, if I needed to take a week off and drive to Mobile for the Senior Bowl, he was all about it. I did some live radio stuff, and he would bring his family to support me. And he was always willing to give me the space, even though I had a full-time job working for him. Anything that would come up that would allow me to advance this part of my career, he was always supportive and always allowing me to do it. So those things were instrumental in me being able to do this. But that's where I would have focused, is wherever I can work that will allow me to do the other things in my life that I want to. That really would have been my focus.
All right, so we're going to change our focus here to one of those other things in your life that I thought was very interesting when I basically Google stalked you. And one of the things that kind of came across was British murder mysteries.
I was going to say, you keep saying I did my research. I'm like, oh man, what's going to come up here? I'm not sure.
I mean, it's not a whole lot of research. It's right there on the bio. I mean, anyone can find it. So how much into these British murder mysteries are you? Because I went down the rabbit hole and pulled 5 British murder mysteries drama shows here, mid-90s to all the way to 2010. And I've got them here for you to blind rank for me. So I told there's a more difficult blind ranking system here. And then there's like a softball one here that we could talk about there, depending on where you're at with your British murder mystery shows. So if you want, I'd like to try and blind rank these ones because I found them fascinating. I already went down that rabbit hole to look at them, which
Love
is
it.
definitely not my forte.
Yeah, let's do it.
You can basically make up anything. I would nod and
You
smile.
probably know. I was gonna say I probably haven't seen all of these, but I hope I have. I hope I can give you an honest ranking here.
Well, the first one that comes to mind that I pulled up here is, so 1 to 5, can't move them around. Once I say them, you got to put them in that spot, and that's how this kind of works. Right. So the first one is, one of maybe my favorite actresses is in this one, Helen Mirren from the Red series there. Detective Chief Inspector Jane Tennyson, one of the first female DCIs in London's Metropolitan Police Department. Prime Suspect is the show. Where would you have that?
I haven't seen it, but I love Helen Mirren. So I'm going to put it at 3 to give me a base here, because Helen Mirren, anything she's in is going to be fantastic. I'm confident in that.
That's exactly the way I kind of went there. I don't know what this is, but I seen her image on there. I'm like, this has got to make the top 5. Yep. It's got to be there. I mean, let's be honest. I kind of cheated. I went like top British murder mysteries, and kind of, so you can pretty much go with any of these and be okay. Number 2, a little bit older one here, Broadchurch. Now, Broadchurch, it contains a wealth of talent. David Tennant, Olivia Colman, Jodie Whittaker, captivating everyone when it was first aired on ITV in the UK. Where do you got Broadchurch?
I'm gonna put. I don't know what I'm trying to leave myself some room at the top here, so I'm gonna put Broadchurch at 4. I would put it higher just because I love David Tennant. He is one of the best, one of my favorite actors, one of my favorite human beings. I think he's fantastic. If you've never seen, he's amazing in Doctor Who. He's amazing in Good Omens. Anything he touches is fantastic. But if some other shows that I love aren't on the list, it would probably go higher. But I'll leave it at 4 and leave myself some room here.
Well, and you know what? There's nothing wrong with this because, like I said, it was funny how when I started doing this research, how many of the faces I knew with the name. I didn't quite pick up the names, but as soon as I saw the face, I'm like, oh, I gotta see that. Or I've seen this.
Yeah.
I can't believe I actually saw it. So another one that comes up here, and I'm the worst person for names. It took me 2 years to say Tua Tagovailoa, okay? So just to kind of keep that in mind when we're talking about names, I'm going to say names wrong all the time. And hopefully this is somewhat right, but I'm going to go with Shetland here. Shetland, it takes place on the islands there above Scotland. It follows Jimmy Perez there, Douglas Henschel, and his team as they investigate murders, crimes across the islands. Where would you get this one?
I'm going to put this one at 5. It's good. I've seen a couple episodes. It's pretty good. I'm still gonna put it on the low end just in case a couple of my favorites are still on there.
All right. Well, next up we have Unforgotten, which is DI Suncell there, Sonny Khan. He's and his partner DCI Cassie Stewart, and later DCI Jesse James, Sinead Keenan solve various harrowing cold cases amid the hustle and bustle of London. Where do you got this?
I mean, I got to put it at 2. I don't think I've seen this one either. But there's a lot of them to get to. So I'm going to have to go back and watch these now. The ones I haven't seen, I'll have to go back and watch them. But I know what it is for sure.
Well, the last one I have seen, Wallander, and I know that's not a bad one out there. So through the American remakes of British shows, more often than not, are abysmal. British remakes of European shows tend to have a stronger success rate. One of those successes is undoubtedly the BBC's adaptation of the Swedish detective series, Wallander.
Yep. Well, obviously it's going at number 1. It's a solid show. Again, I love anything to do with that region, man. I don't know why. It's English murder mysteries are just so fun. They're so, I could easily make probably another top 5, top 10 list out of so many of the other good ones for sure.
Oh, there's the list went on and on. Like even the one that didn't make it, I think it's called Luther with Idris Elba.
Yep.
I'm like, yep. I don't know the show, but I'm like, if Idris Elba's in it, it's got to be a good show because I mean it spans so many seasons there and whatnot. But I'm like, I didn't know where to go with this. I'm like, I've never seen British shows, and then also like, you know what? Actually, I have. I'm a huge Monty Python fan. So the humor I love, the humor I know I love, the murder mystery. Well, we'll get into that.
Yep. If anybody loves them, I gotta recommend Endeavor. Go watch Endeavor. It's one of maybe my favorite show ever. It's really, really good. Vera, which has Brenda Blethyn in it, who I'm sure you'll recognize from A Million Things to Be Sorry Face. McDonald and Dodds is great. Father Brown is hilarious if you want more of a lighthearted one. There's a Catholic priest that goes around making the cops look silly and always solving their crimes for them. It's got Mark Williams, who played Ron Weasley's dad in Harry Potter. So you'll recognize him as well. But there's so many, man. There's anytime a new one comes up, I'm like, yes, let's do this.
All right. Well, one thing I have to do on every show is kind of ask someone what has sports media, what has fantasy football, what has the draft prospect type of process. What has it taught you about yourself?
You know, I think I'll speak about the draft process first, because I think what it's done for me, learning, going 25 plus years now of evaluating players, it's gone from I really enjoyed watching these players play in college for my favorite teams or whatever, and being obsessed with what makes them succeed or fail at the next level. What is that in that process that what are the variables that matter? And it's gone from, hey, I hope the Bucs draft this really good player, or hey, I hope this guy from USF does well, to and on the flip side of that, your rival teams, you don't want them to draft a player from this school, you don't whatever. But when you really get into this business, which means you're interviewing players, you're in the locker rooms and you're getting to know these guys, it's hard to root against anybody anymore. I think that's what, for me, once you understand the humanity of the game and understand that these are all just people, just like you, trying to live out their dreams. All these football players are trying to do what I'm doing, writing about it. So it's so much easier for me to not hate on players, to not criticize, to try to focus on what they do well, and not, I'm never going to sit here in a scouting report ever anymore and say, this player cannot do this at the next level. This player cannot succeed. This player cannot. There's a lot of other analysts that are comfortable doing that, and maybe it's just their process is better and they can be more comfortable in making those assertions than I can. But I feel like there's so many guys that have proven us all wrong way too often, and so much about my process that I think is always evolving, that once you hear these players' stories and once you understand the humanity behind the helmets and behind the jerseys and the team names, every game I watch, college or pro, I have a reason to be happy whoever wins, because there's somebody I interviewed who I know went through so much to get to that point and succeeded and is living out their dream and got a game-winning interception or signed a big contract to take care of their family and so many of those things. So I think, if anything, it's just given me such a great appreciation for, again, to go back to my college days. I couldn't cut it on probably the worst. It was like the second season ever of Kentucky Christian University football. So we were not very good. Okay. We were in the Mid-South Conference. We played with other teams like Lambeth University, who was like a top 10 team in the NAIA at the time. I mean, we got our asses kicked every single week. And it's so funny, having played at that level and sucked, like not being good enough to play at that level. It's so funny now for me to hear people talk about lower competition and small school guys this, and they just don't play good enough. I guarantee you, I promise you, at the lowest levels of college football, it is better football than most people could possibly fathom, because I saw it for like firsthand. Like, these are all players that us NFL draft experts would think there's no chance. These guys are all NAIA players that can't play. They can't play at the next level. They're not very good. I saw the work and effort it takes firsthand to not even be close to be good enough to beat those players. And so when you take that and just extrapolate that over the highest levels of college football and into the NFL, it just gives me such an appreciation for how much work, how much talent, how much effort it takes to get to that point. And I think that will always give me a very healthy appreciation for every single player who's out there. It's why it's very hard for me to even be at a football game and hear fans screaming at players, "Oh, you suck, you this." I promise you, the worst player in the NFL does not suck. They don't. They're among the best in the world at what they do. And I think that's a healthy thing to always keep in the back of our minds, that these guys are all just people. They're not robots. Even the least talented among them is still so much more talented at the game and so much better at it than 99% of the other people in the world.
Yeah, they're the one percenters, so to speak, right? We've all heard that kind of spoken before, and I love that take, because when I look back in my reports, it's what can this player do, and then I think he could do this, or I think he needs to work on this. Not that he can't do it, because I hate that. How many of these guys have already overcome so many things, or being told they couldn't do something where they've proved you wrong? We don't know where they're coming from their high school days. We don't know what kind of background they came from. Some of them have come through some pretty tough situations to get to where they are today. So you never want to count any of these guys out at any time. Man, I would hate to give yourself or Matt Miller or Mel Kiper my high school football tape, because I guarantee you this guy can't do this, this guy can't do that, and they wouldn't be wrong. I'll tell you that right now, because there was plenty that I couldn't do, especially when we talk about these one percenters. Now, one last piece of advice for those who are trying to break into a market that's somewhat saturated but open to all kinds of possibilities still, and that's the sports media, because more people than ever are getting in, but there's less and less opportunities, so to speak, at the same time. So what would your one piece of advice be for that? And then after that, one piece of parental advice that maybe you wish you knew 5-6 years ago before now, right? So,
I mean, the work advice, I would say there's two things that I think are really important. Number one is take advantage of the fact that you don't need anybody's permission to start. I think, again, we spoke about it earlier with the advancements in technology and the fact that you can make a free website in 5 minutes. Take advantage of the fact that if no one's giving you a job, you do not need someone else's permission to put your work out there. You create it, you do it yourself until you don't have to anymore, until you do have help, until you do have support and resources. And so take full advantage of that. If you're just waiting for an opportunity, that's a great way to start to create them for yourself. And again, my experience told me that, and I see it work for so many other people too, especially if you're into niche things. Like the draft is a prime example. It's become such a big thing, but it wasn't always like that. And so if there's something else that you're interested in, go create your own space for it. Make yourself an authority on that in your own space. And then people will notice, people will see. And I think the other thing would be just, if the opportunities that you want from media outlets or other places aren't the ones they aren't your first choice, right? If you want to cover the draft, but somebody an outlet needs you to cover the baseball, or needs you to cover the WNBA, needs you to cover the Olympics, try that instead. Because if I look back, some of the most important lessons I learned about how to do sports journalism in a good way came from tagging along and watching the best sports writers cover high school softball games and covering region volleyball tournaments in Greenup County, Kentucky, when I was playing football and then writing for the newspaper at night, and talking to high school volleyball coaches and learning how to ask good questions, because I'm talking to a 68-year-old who's been coaching volleyball for 20 years and knows more about the game than I will ever know. But I'm learning how to communicate with people. I'm learning how to communicate with people who are experts and experienced in their fields. And so I didn't grow up wanting to be a volleyball journalist, but I took those assignments because that was there, and I learned things doing that absolutely to this day helped me do the work I'm doing now that I really wanted to do. So I think that would be my other piece of advice, is if you don't have the one opportunity that you really want to do, but you have some other ones that maybe aren't in your wheelhouse, take them, see what happens. You may fall in love with one of those other sports. You may meet people that are invaluable to continuing your journey and open up all these other doors. And it might teach you more than you might think about what you really want to be doing, and it might get you there in the first place. Parental advice, man, it's really simple. I would say that, first of all, your best is always good enough. Just do the best you can. And I think the other one is apologize to your kids as much as possible. We all know, if we're honest with ourselves, that we don't have it figured out. And I think the worst thing we can do sometimes is project that to our kids, that we do have it all figured out, that we know all the answers, that it's my way or the highway, and it's just because I said so. That doesn't fly. I think one of the things we give credit the least to kids for is the fact that they are really good BS sniffers. I feel like we don't understand how good they are at it, but kids get it. Kids know a lot more than I think we give them credit for, and I think they can tell when you're feeding them a bill of goods, and that I think that has an impact. And so I think if they can pick up on the fact that you're still doing your best, you're going to keep them as safe as possible, you can do everything you can. I don't think it's a bad thing to let them know that you're still trying to figure it out too.
All right, Luke. Well, let everyone know where they can figure out to find you. Where you at? What you got coming on?
You can find me at athlonsports.com, writing all kinds of football stuff over there, college, pro, NFL, the draft, obviously. Go pick up all of our magazines. I got to edit the fantasy magazine. I wrote some stuff for the NFL magazine, the college magazine I edited. Go pick up our Boston Celtics championship magazine that we just put out. I just did some editing on that as well. I'm on Twitter at Luke Easterling. Come talk some sports, man.
All right, maybe the biggest takeaway from this entire show is the Cuban sandwich has to be on Cuban bread. And if you don't do that, that's not on salami. We'll see you next week. Take care.